So we just looked at how you might be motivated by the pay. You might be motivated by the opportunity for raises, bonuses, recognition. You might be motivated by the job itself. Let's look at another way we might motivate people. And let's just continue our list here. So I'm just going to add in here. This is based on job, career, calling. Okay, another way we might be motivated. All right, so the next one we're going to look at is the Hawthorne Effect. So the Hawthorne Effect looks at the impact that we have on people when they're being observed. So picture a scenario. You are standing in front of the class or in front of your team, and you have to count backwards from 500 by 7 out loud. Okay, so you start counting backwards. Then we ask you to count backwards from 700 by 6 on a piece of paper. Do you perform the same for those two activities? Do you get the same number in terms of the amount of numbers you're able to list in a minute? Do you get that same performance regardless? Well, my guess is that first scenario where you have to do it out loud, you feel kind of nervous. You can feel the eyes on you. You think, oh my God, what am I going to do it wrong? And I make a fool out of myself. So people observing us change our behavior. And this is what they found in the Hawthorne Effect. So in the 1930s, Western Electric, Hawthorne Works, they were manufacturing telephone equipment. And as part of this extenuation of scientific management, they wanted to know if we improve the lighting in our manufacturing plant, would that increase productivity? So they conducted a study and they increased the lighting in the telephone equipment manufacturing, and everyone's productivity went up. Then they tested that against no change in lighting. Everyone's productivity went up. Then they tried it with less lighting. Everybody's productivity went up. And they were confused. What do we do? What's going on here? Well, it turns out that the sheer fact that people were being watched changed their productivity. So think about it. When your boss is around, it becomes performance art, right? I have to look like I know what I'm doing. I have to look expert. I have to look as a really good worker, right? So I'm going to be very productive, very efficient when I'm being watched because my boss is looking. And this is what is known as the Hawthorne Effect, that when people are being observed, their performance changed. And in terms of management, the productivity went up when people were being watched. So there's a video here on the Hawthorne Effect. I'll provide a link here in the video and you can check out some more information on it. But if you don't check out the video, one thing it talks about is how they were really confused after this study about why productivity went up regardless. And so they were doing a number of other tests to see if any other methods changed productivity. And it kept being persistent that people being watched were doing better regardless of the processes they were testing. And so what happened is as they were trying to investigate this, they then started doing surveys of the workers. What changes your productivity? What motivates you? And it's these surveys and this in-depth look at asking employees about how they are motivated that leads us to our next individual. So Elton Mayo is the father of the human relations movement, and he studied those surveys, that feedback from Hawthorne, looking at why people were more productive. And here's what he found. What he found is a lack of attention to the workers results in underproduction. So if we ignore the workers, when management doesn't check in on them, then there's no motivation to work hard. Might as well goof off. We can think about the discussions we had in a previous video about working from home, remote work. And there was an article that said, I could have been dead for 2 weeks and my boss would never know. Well, the idea behind that, right, is the lack of attention from management meant nobody's checking to see if I can do my job, if I'm doing my job. And what Mayo found is that if management's not paying attention, then we underproduce. Then we're not as efficient. Now, what's interesting with the studies that have been going on during COVID was that management was very concerned if people were working remotely, there was a lack of attention from management, and that people would not be productive. But so far, what's coming out of the studies during COVID for white-collar work is that productivity did not decline during that period, even though there was less managing by walking around in terms of management observing and being there to see you do your job. But what Mayo found is that if management doesn't pay attention at all, then there tends to be underproduction. He also emphasized that it all depends on the type of interaction with supervisors and coworkers. And so just like where we counted backwards, and if we had to do that publicly, interactions with supervisors and coworkers can cause stress, right? It can be a stressful situation. So we need to look at what does that interaction with supervisors and coworkers look like. The other thing that Mayo identified is that the workplace rules and procedures. So when we talk about what an employee can do and can't do, that very much influences worker attitudes. So how restrictive are we being on worker behavior? And that can impact their motivation. We also need to recognize that workers feed off of each other. And so it is their attitudes that also create informal rules and influence their attitudes. So think about when you go on a job, the people around you give you advice. Do this, don't do this. And so their attitudes, their behaviors, their advice creates informal rules in terms of what you should do and don't do. You know, the boss prefers this, so do this way. Or, you know, the boss is really using just this one metric to see how well people are performing. So just focus on this aspect of your job. Don't worry about the other piece. These create the informal rules within the organization that impact behavior and attitudes. So if we're looking at job satisfaction, we're looking at attitudes, these all influence motivation. And so we need to look at how do we increase that job satisfaction and motivation. According to Mayo, you need to have a relationship between the manager and the employee where they have freedom to discuss problems, so the employee can bring up issues and the employee can express their opinions. So there is this ability to talk with the manager without that fear of repercussion. And there's a bit of empowerment here in terms of the ability to say, well, there's a better way to do this. And as an employee, I have the ability to set my own standards of output and determine how I do my particular job. The other thing Mayo recognized is that it's not just pay that motivates people. It's peer approval. It's staff parties, recognition. Those are just as effective as bonuses and profit sharing. So people value the social component of a job, and that also motivates them. So we'll look at Mayo here in our list. And so what motivates people? It is the social aspect of the job. We want to have some employee empowerment in terms of discussions with management, so we need that relationship between manager and employee. And recognizing that because we value that social aspect of the job, that peer approval, parties, opportunities to socialize are just as effective as pay. Okay. So looking at different theories, different approaches to motivation that all tend to build into today's job as we look at motivating our workers. So it's this focus then on the employer-manager relationship that is going to move us into the humanistic view of management.